Hey everyone, welcome back today to Berlin Noir, and for today's episode, we're going to be working on this fairly big piece of land here, directly east of the Tempelhof airfield and the allotments that we built in the previous two episodes. And today's episode is going to feature a good amount of variation, I should say. Working on what we're doing here now is this little traffic circle here, centered with this church. But as you can see from this little picture here, we're going to be building what we're doing on screen, the church, and then working our way down with some blocks, including some allotments. I know I said I wasn't going to be doing any of those again anytime soon, but it's a very small amount that I do in this episode. And then also a cemetery that we're going to do towards the end of the episode. So yeah, it's a very interesting area in Berlin. Both back then and today, seems not too much really has actually changed from 1929 to the modern day. I guess it was, must have been relatively untouched during the Second World War. Really, the only exception to that is the fact that you couldn't really see in the picture that popped up, but basically between the airport and this area that I'm building here, there's just this little segment that's hard to see exactly what it is. It's because it's partly under construction or maybe being ripped up. It's hard to say. It's hard to see exactly on the aerial footage that I have. But it looked to be, or was going to be, a park of some kind. More of a, not like an open green area park, but more so like a fancier, with paths and rows of trees, that type of park. I don't know what quite to call that, but yeah, so that's really the only thing that I could say that's changed significantly, at least. The area now has a whole lot more trees, just, given time, of course, trees grow to be quite large. So yeah, this area now is very green, and it looks really cool on Google Maps to look at all the trees and such in the area. But so this church here in the center is just a very small church. The asset there I scaled down a bit just to make it a little smaller. It's similar-ish, the asset that I used to the one in real life. Kind of just really more or less a square and more tall than it is wide or long. So yeah, I think it looked good in the circle there. But another thing, since, working with this type of traffic circle, as we come to build it in a second, but just trying to build around a tight circle like this, where, it's kind of difficult for sure. We did it previously with the Maring Plots video, I believe. It was a little while ago that we did that one, but another similar type thing. The traffic circle there was a tad bit larger, which made it a tad bit easier. But really, as you can see, it's a pretty tight circle. There's really not much to work with there. So I had to resort to using the smallest building more possible, really, so that you left me with either buildings that were only 1 unit long, or wide, I should say, 1 unit wide, or what I'm using here, which are 2 wide. So these are just 2x2, that's their building footprint. And I really do love this particular asset. I use this building a whole lot, just filling in the normal blocks, residential blocks and such. So it's a nice asset. I don't know why I like it so much, but just the facade and everything, it looks really nice. But so I had to use PO to kind of make it look a little nicer. You still get some wonky things there, as you can see. I'm trying to fix it, but I just end up throwing a little awning there just to hide some of the screwed up parts, thanks to PO, and as well as a flag, just I guess draw attention away. But it's either way, it's some added detail that makes it look a tad bit nicer. Because just plopping down these simple buildings is pretty easy to do, at least in the gridded areas. So, I can, that's why, Berlin is, for a European city that's, old, Berlin's fairly grid-like, at least relative to, other European cities. That's not to say that there aren't European cities that are more grid-like, that are old as well, but yeah, it's if you live there or you're familiar with it, then you know what I'm talking about. There's a good amount of grid. Of course, there's also streets that go wild and crazy and curve around with no purpose, it seems. But for the most part, like this area, with the exception of this little circle here, it's pretty much just a grid. So just a bunch of 90-degree angles. So I can just plop these building downs for the most part without much care. So it's I want to try and avoid that, just plopping down these buildings on these simple grids, because that really, when it's so easy like that, you kind of just do it without thinking much, and you don't really add too much detail, at least when I do it myself. I'm sure that varies whoever is building, but so something like this, just a little traffic circle is nice to break up the monotony, and both, in appearance, just seeing a bunch of blocks, but also for me building, it changes it up, because there's not too many areas like this in Berlin. But I really do enjoy using PO to, what I'm doing here, just blending buildings together, clipping them together, and making them look as if they're one large, building that's not a bunch of small ones placed together. Because it's fairly easy. It varies per building, of course. Some assets have a lot of these little edges and vertices that you have to move around, but some make it easier. Which, for instance, this asset that I'm using is pretty easy, so I can move the roofs together so they look intact and as one, which is just pretty satisfying, at least for me, to do it, because it's simple enough and it just looks 1,000 times better than just leaving it be. Which earlier on in the series I did that a good amount of times, just kind of clipped buildings together and more or less just haphazardly, not caring too much about anything clipping out too much. If it was really obvious and really bad, then I would fix it. But like a building like this, what I'm doing now, normally, or not normally, but earlier on in the series, I'd probably just leave it almost, just because it's not too noticeable. It's not a central piece of the city. It's just some random street in an area than a building. But just, it takes 10 seconds there just to do that, and it looks so much nicer. But yeah, so I know I mentioned before, but I never actually did it really. But I do have to go around and find some of the more obvious buildings with clipping, that are messed up from just kind of trying to clip those buildings together and try and fix them with PO. Which, yeah, I don't know. I do have to revisit a good number of places in the city for a number of reasons. Maybe just to update it. My knowledge of German cities and Berlin has obviously expanded greatly since I first started this city. I didn't know very much, and it's amazing how much you'll learn, which you have to learn really when, building a city with as much detail and, accuracy as you can. But yeah, there's some areas I'll have to revisit, which I'll probably make an episode of eventually, or episode or two maybe, of, fixing areas, updating areas, making them more realistic, making them look more like actually Berlin. But and also, I don't know if anyone else has this issue, and I've mentioned it previously, but I think it's getting worse, it seems, which I do have a number of small minor issues, which I won't get into because they're not, game breaking as of yet. Hopefully, a bunch of small issues, of course, add up to, eventually sometimes break people's games. So, cross your fingers, I guess. Don't want to ever get to that point anytime soon. But the issue that I'm having, that I'm curious if anyone else has, is with the Hide It mod. And it's I have, so, to remove, of course, all the modern props that come with the base game, the vanilla game. So, like bus stops, some vanilla props that are just ugly or whatever. Whatever it may be, street props. So I don't want to have, like, a bunch of modern things on the street side. But you'll notice occasionally, like for instance, right there on the bottom right side of the screen, there's a little fire hydrant. Which, I mean, there's nothing wrong with a fire hydrant that doesn't, scream modern, Germany or whatever, because that's fire hydrants have existed for a while. But it's that is supposed to not be there. I have random street props like that, and whatever the other ones are, removed with the hide it mod, as well as like satellite dishes on roofs and some other various props. I can't really think of the exact ones, but there's a number of them that are obviously clearly modern that for whatever reason I have them checked in the hide it mod to remove them, and they aren't removed ever. I can go in and uncheck it and recheck it to remove it, and nothing happens. And yeah, I have no idea. And visiting the workshop page of that mod to see if anyone else has any issues or in the comments or anything, I don't see anything. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure what it is. It could totally just be on my end for whatever reason, a conflict with another mod. I mean, there's I forget the name, like there's some mod basically that checks all the mods against each other's for incompatibilities, and at times it recommends alternative mods that are perhaps better. And I ran that, and it didn't say there was any issues. So yeah, I don't really know exactly what is up with that. But yeah, it's one of really quite a few things that are kind of weird with this save, which just, of course, going to persevere through it and hope it doesn't become a bigger issue in the future. But anyways, back to what we are doing on screen, and this is some of the allotments. So yeah, I know in the previous episode we had an entire episode dedicated to allotments, and I said I'm not doing this anytime soon. So psych, I am. It's a small amount, but the whole reason I am including this in this is because, as you can see, there's buildings, large buildings right next to it, and mixed in with these small little private allotments. And I'll throw up, if I can get a better zoomed in picture from the aerial view right here, but you can see that it looks as though during this time, I don't know if it started a few years earlier or if it was starting at this time exactly, because it seems as though 1928, 29, 30 was a big important time in Germany for architectural reasons and redesigning the city, let alone a million other reasons. But just the actual design of the city, it was a important time for a lot of redevelopment. But yeah, so it seems in this area that these allotments were being replaced with these large buildings, these large residential commercial buildings. And you can it looks maybe a little weird having these large 4, 5, 6-story buildings towering over these allotments, but it's even a common theme nowadays. You have reason for expansion in cities all over the world, but private property, people don't want to sell their homes. Not that these are homes, but you have an allotment. This is your own personal place. I'm sure I wouldn't want it sold either. And I don't know the laws of within Germany today or back then regarding this type of deal. How much power a private citizen has to resist redevelopment of their property. But it happens all over the world today as well. So it's an interesting thing to actually see that see it so obviously in a crappy aerial view taken from a balloon. Just it makes typically it's hard to see exactly sometimes what's going on because it's just a 2D image and it's black and white, so it's what is that. But you can clearly see that is what was going on back then. So it's certainly cool to try and recreate that, which I do cut out some of the allotments that I built because there's a little bit more that I add. But, you know, like I said, we built allotments in the previous episode, so I'm pretty sure everyone is allotmented out. Just made a word up. But, yeah, so moving on from the allotments here, we're getting to this building here, which for this, I used the modular pack of the Charlottenburg Palace, which this one doesn't have the large dome on the central piece there, which the Charlottenburg Palace has. And, you know, I changed it up enough where it doesn't necessarily look like anything like the actual Charlottenburg Palace, because, you know, that thing's massive and long and, you know, a very beautiful building. So, yeah, the only reason really I use this particular asset is because it resembles the real life building here pretty nicely, with the orange-ish roof and just a general architectural style. So, you know, there's not too many assets like that in game, so I option to go with this here. And yeah, like I said, it doesn't really look like the Charlottenburg Palace, so that's why I figured it wasn't too big of a deal. So, you know, that's something I want to build eventually, probably pretty soon. I'm considering staying around this area of the city just because my FPS is significantly better. And I mean, the rest of the city, you know, it's pretty rough, the FPS. Which I know I recognize in a time-lapse like this, you know, I speed up the video 500%, so it's not noticeable, and, you know, in the cinematics I can account for the terrible FPS, but, you know, for me, building it for my own sanity, I guess, it kind of sucks. So that's why for, I don't know, another episode or two, I'm going to probably stay out this way, just enjoy the slightly better FPS until I have to return inevitably to the center of the city to fill in a lot of gaps, because there are for sure a lot of gaps. So, you know, that's going to come in time, revisiting those portions of the city. But yeah, so back to this, what we're doing on screen. And so the building that I just built, I don't know what it is actually. So if on Google Maps, if you zoom in on it, it doesn't actually have any sort of identifier on top of that building, but on one of those side little like houses, I guess it looks like, at least the assets that I use, those two little black roof houses. One of those on Google Maps says it's a school. So I'm guessing the entire thing's a school, but you know, I don't know if there's always been a school back then, today, I don't really know. But either way, it's still nonetheless a cool building there that I had to recreate that looks recognizable, so that's why I included it. But yeah, I also built some allotments there to the left side of it there, you can see off camera, since that's another area where they had some allotments until, you know, they were eventually replaced with buildings of, you know, residential or who knows what. But so yeah, moving on to the end of the episode, which is the cemetery here. So this area I condensed a lot. So there's actually supposed to be another street going across, separate from the one I'm adding trees along right here. But a street with some, you know, sizable buildings and a little plaza in the center as well with some buildings around it, which I initially, of course, had plans to build. I had the street and everything laid down, but as I was building down this way and trying to make room for that, whatever, the school, that orange roof building there, and this segment of the cemetery here, I realized that I wasn't going to have space for that additional road with housing on it, so I got rid of that. And then I also got rid of a park which is actually the area that I'm building at right now. And I just decided to make this entire thing a cemetery. And yeah, it's because like looking at the aerial view that I have from back then, it looks as though this was a cemetery as well. I mean, it's really hard to tell. It looks like I see lined, like things in a line. So of course tombstones or, you know, some sort of grave. Yeah, it looks to be that the case. But you know, today this area is in fact a park, and the cemetery side is on the southern side of the street that I decided not to include because I didn't have room. So yeah, so it's hard to see exactly, but either way, you're going to be able to get the large open green area, whether it be a park or a cemetery. You know, at least how it looked back then. It's hard to tell the difference, but yeah. So I just, like I said, just decided to go ahead and make this a cemetery, which this area has a lot of cemeteries. I guess this is all considered Neukölln neighborhood in Berlin. But yeah, there's a couple cemeteries north of the airfield. There's a couple cemeteries out east of the airfield, and then there looks to be one that's like southeast of the airfield. And that's at least today. So, you know, if I were to look at the aerial view, I might notice a couple other ones because I do know there's one. Yeah, actually, that's true, because I know there was one cemetery that was directly north of the airfield, which doesn't exist anymore because when the Tempelhofer airport expanded, that cemetery had to go. So yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting to see so many cemeteries in such a small area. So yeah, I don't know if you know by any chance what that's about. Let me know, because that's an interesting fact. Random fact that I'd be interested in knowing, just because it's, you know, certainly curious to see so many. But yeah, so the other half of the cemetery I do off camera, just because it's more or less a repeat of what I just did, just laying down the trees in a row and laying down the tombstone assets. So at the very end of the episode here, I just wanted to add a few more details to the school, I guess. I'm just going to consider it a school since that's what I think it is today. So I hope you guys all enjoyed the episode and the variation within it. I certainly enjoyed, you know, building it myself. Decent amount of things built in the episode, and, you know, a sizable area that we built here. But if you're new, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and if you enjoyed it, I'd appreciate a thumbs up on the video as well. So I will see you all next week in another video.